let's revisit an important point from the previous section, the value of taking a rest. Though it may seem paradoxical at first, sometimes the best way to do something is not to do it at all. Imagine that you're working your way through endless chemistry questions in an attempt to practice for the exam you have coming up in a few weeks. Time is short, and you're doing your best to cram. You wake up early, seal yourself in your study, and get stuck into paper after paper, answering tricky practice questions, so that when you're facing the real exam paper, you'll know exactly what to do. By 4 p.m. that afternoon, your brain is mush, but you keep going. You encounter an especially challenging glitch that you just can't seem to work out. The problem is, you keep getting a particular kind of question wrong, but you don't know why. It's driving you mad. Finally, you give up and concede defeat and head to bed at midnight, exhausted. In the morning, you wake up and go to your study again for round 2. This time you look at the questions that stumped you yesterday and think to yourself, "Oh, I get it now," and you solve it. Has something like this ever happened to you? It turns out you might not even need a long sleep overnight to get similar aha moments. We all sometimes make the mistake of thinking that it's only active and conscious effort that yields results. It's what makes us stay up until midnight hacking away at a problem. But rest is vitally important, the big rests and the small ones. A study conducted by researchers at the National Institutes of Health reveals the critical role that resting plays in the process of learning new skills. Contrary to the common belief of continuous practice, the study found that taking short breaks during learning may be just as crucial as practice itself. The research involved recording the brainwaves of healthy volunteers as they practiced typing numbers with their left hands, followed by short breaks. Surprisingly, the volunteers' performance improved primarily during the rest periods, with brainwaves indicating memory consolidation happening during those breaks. The changes in brainwaves, specifically in the right hemispheres and neural networks associated with movement planning, correlated with the improvements seen during the rests. This is an important point. The learning itself was happening outside of the practice session, not during. According to study lead Leonardo G. Cohen, senior investigator at NIH's National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, everyone thinks you need to practice when learning something new. Instead, we found that resting, early and often, may be just as critical to learning as practice. Long periods of rest, such as sleeping overnight, are extremely valuable, but the researchers wanted to challenge the idea that this was the only way to consolidate learning. When the team analyzed their data, not only did they discover that improvements were made in rest periods, but they also discovered that the gains made during the shorter waking rest periods between practice sessions were greater than the gains made between daily sessions, i.e., after the participants returned the next day and did the tests again after a night's sleep. That means that smaller rest periods were more powerful than longer periods of sleep. During a rest period, the brain is consolidating everything it has learned during the more active phase of practice, and this is observable in the changes of brain waves patterning in the brain. Now, the research team was especially interested in using their findings to help people who have experienced stroke to rehabilitate and relearn the skills they lost. While they have not tested whether their conclusions would work for ordinary people who want to better master their chosen skill, it's worth paying attention to how you schedule your own break time when you practice. Instead of practice, it may be more effective to practice, rest. It may be that taking even micro breaks of around 10 seconds during your practice can help your brain properly absorb what it's learned. After every repetition you make, pause a little. During that moment, it will be as though your brain quickly replays a compressed memory of what you've just experienced. The researchers discovered that the brain literally goes over a version of what you've just practiced, only about 20 times faster, taking just a few seconds. Interestingly, they also found that the first few practice sessions tended to be the most critical for this process. If you just barge ahead without taking breaks of any size, you never give yourself that chance to consolidate and may find that you tend to forget huge chunks of what you've already covered. You may even notice that after a long, hard study session, you seemingly can only remember the last few minutes of it, for example. That's because the more separate instances of rest, the more effectively you learn. If you rest only once, you effectively consolidate only once, and it doesn't matter how long that rest was. Thinking of rest in this way reframes a break as a hidden rep, where you're actually giving the idea time to sink in. It's like gradually pouring water into a potted plant. You pour some, wait for it to soak in, then pour a little more. This spacing effect not only feels more comfortable, but will help you learn more quickly in less time, without you needing to burn yourself out. There's value in medium rest periods too. According to Time magazine, the perfect break is having a 17-minute break after 52 minutes of practice or work. Built into this, however, can be many dozens of smaller 10-second breaks after each new chunk of information or repetition is encountered. Then, on the biggest scale, you have longer periods of deeper rest when you can sleep each day. How to rest. It may seem strange to have a how-to when it comes to rest, but many of us genuinely get it wrong. Perhaps because we're so used to overvaluing the active, deliberate portion of our practice that we forget how to literally stop and do nothing. We may, for example, ask questions like, what's the most effective way to rest? As though we can apply the same measure of productivity to what our brain does automatically and passively. The only rule of resting is that you have to genuinely rest. That means do nothing. Don't think about what you're going to do next or what you have already done. Don't consciously try to carry on working in your head. During the work period, give your tasks your full attention and make progress. Then completely disengage from work during the break, allowing your brain to rest and refresh. There is a caveat to the do-nothing rule, however, and that is that you can also rest by immersing yourself in a completely different task. For example, if you've been using your brain all morning and you need a break, don't rest by reading if that book is fiction and something you do just for fun. This will be somewhat relaxing, but it won't be a complete rest because your brain is still working. Instead, you might go outdoors for a walk or run, or just let your mind loosen and empty, even though your body might suddenly be very active. In the same way, many students have accidentally discovered that even if they sacrifice a few hours of study and socialize into the night instead, they are mysteriously more refreshed the next morning than if they had studied and gone to bed early. That's because even though they were physically awake and socializing till late, they were still giving their academic mind the chance to completely switch off and recharge. It goes the other way, too. If you've been training hard all day and your muscles are tired and sore, vegging out on the sofa with a challenging crossword may still register as a break, from your body's point of view, anyway. This has been The Art of Practice. Accelerate your learning, quickly build experience, and perform like a pro. Written by Peter Hollins, narrated by Russell Newton. Copyright 2023 by Peter Hollins. Production copyright by Peter Hollins.